Welcome to the Retirement Revolution Summit, where we explore ways to improve your financial results, grow your retirement portfolio, and help you reach your retirement goals. This is Tom Garlock, and I want to welcome a friend and an excellent speaker, Mr. Michael Budnick. Michael Budnick is the founder and lead consultant for College Tuition Advisors. Prior to founding College Tuition Advisors, Michael was a retirement planning specialist for over 15 years. In this role, he worked with many families who were anxiously attempting to fund their children's college education, but were having little success. According to Michael, many families had monthly cash flow challenges, and they were raiding their retirement accounts. Michael observed lots of things not being properly handled for the children's college education. He acquired the skills and knowledge to really make a difference, getting kids to college of their choice without their parents going broke. As a retirement planning specialist, Michael has worked at every level, one-on-one, with individuals, small businesses, corporations, as well as government and healthcare systems. Michael, in the past, served as Vice President of Great West Retirement Services. He supervised and managed all of the company's representatives and admission staff in Texas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. His office managed 55,000 plan participants in both government and healthcare defined contribution plans that had total assets under management back then of over $2.2 billion. Michael now lives in Burbank, California, and Austin, Texas. And Michael, it's with great pleasure. I want to welcome you and all of our listeners to the Retirement Revolution Summit. Great to be with you today. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us.
Well, thank you, Tom. I'm really delighted to be here and really appreciate as well being able to be a part of what you guys are developing here. This is very, very exciting. And I'd like to take a minute just to congratulate our number of listeners that are here, because you're probably one of a small group of folks that here in the United States really have taken the time to listen to this information. There's approximately 13 million kids applying for college. So that's 13 million families every year applying for this process. So good for you to be a part of this conversation. And today's webinar is actually the little-known secrets on how to get the maximum money for college. And I'd like to talk about how you can legally arrange your financial situation to pay for college with as little out of pocket as possible. And that little as out of pocket as possible is what we'll really focus in on today. Again, my name is Michael Budnick. Delighted to be here. And wanted to start out by talking about some of our parents' biggest concerns. When we did a survey on our parents across the United States, these were the key points that people were really concerned about: missing deadlines and making mistakes. The third point on here, developing a plan to pay for college. I can tell you with well over 100 clients, I've yet to find a client that's actually had a plan developed on how to pay for college, so that's a biggie. Not having the time to do everything involved and getting it all taken care of. And these last two are real big as well. Doing something that will hurt their child's chances for college admission, and lastly, doing something that will cause them to not get the most financial aid possible. So we'll really focus on those last 2 points here in our webinar. Now, college cost. It's a big issue today, and it's expensive no matter where your kids go. When we talk about college, it's not just tuition. We have to look at room and board, books, miscellaneous expenses, and living expenses. That's what really goes into what we would call the cost of attendance for college. And across the U.S., looking at our state colleges, the average cost is about $20,000 a year. Our private colleges are about $50,000 a year. So you're looking at approximately $80,000 to $200,000 to get one child through college. Now multiply that by two kids, and now you're at $160,000 to $400,000. Multiply that by three kids, and you're at $240,000 to $600,000, and you just bought a house in Southern California. So it's really important, and I'll say to families, if you've got a fourth kid, you probably should have stopped at three. That was a joke. But each college, the costs are going up approximately 6% a year has been the average rate of college increasing. And as most folks know, the inflation rates are running around 3%. So it is a real big issue. And then along with that, how is a family supposed to pay for all that? There's really three things that you can do. You can obviously get the money from your savings. You can borrow from college. And, of course, Most people, when I talk to them, everybody wants to get scholarships. That's obviously where we get and find all the free money. Let's talk about savings. Take that $200,000 that's burning a hole in your pocket. That was supposed to be a joke, by the way. But let's just say, as example, if you've got $30,000 sitting in savings or checking or money market, non-retirement money, that could cost you each and every year for college anywhere from $1,692 up to about $6,000 per year. So multiply that out over 4 years, and you're looking at, a hefty amount of money. And so it's really, really important that you know what to do before you play this game, before you actually engage in this process. Let's discuss borrowing the money. There's clearly several different ways to borrow the money for college. And if you're going to get, and borrow the money for college, I know these are really kind of simplistic questions, but wouldn't you rather get a tax deduction than not get one? And, have a monthly payment versus a variable increasing payment? And also with student loans, getting loans that are free when it comes to the actual interest while your student is in college, and also versus, high-rate student loans. And then also, wouldn't it be good, to, as opposed to taking a loan out each and every semester, really having the funds available prior to funding college? And I use the example of Best Buy. You can buy a big screen TV, for same as cash for 18 months. Well, there are college loans that work exactly the same way, where you can get a college loan where it's free on the interest while your student is in college. So it's kind of same as cash for 4.5 years. And again, really want to know what your options are before you go down this road. And a little later in the webinar, I'm going to cover, more detail on the various types of loans. But let's talk about scholarships. And Tom, if I can ask you a question, there's $198 billion available today in student aid that came in the form of scholarships. Do you have kind of an idea what percentage of that money might have come in scholarships? Do you think it's 10%, 5%, 50%? If you were to guess, what do you think?
I would say somewhere in that 10, 15% range.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's actually 3.1% out of that out of the $198 billion that's available. And, I really recommend to families that, don't spend, 96.9% of your time going after 3.1% of the money. But when you're looking for these private scholarships, it's always a good idea for seniors to look, even juniors, to look back at last year's commencement program at their local high school. Talk to your high school guidance counselors, check in with your local chamber of commerce, your church or synagogue, and also employers. If you work for a relatively large employer, it's a really good idea to check in with the HR department. And the oldest search web out there is called fastweb.com. And I've seen scholarships for, things like being left-handed, having a heart murmur, but, we're talking hundreds of dollars on these scholarships. So you really have to question whether it's really, really worth it or not. So how much aid is available? Again, there's $198 billion out there, in financial aid and tax relief. The key is knowing where to get it. And if you look at the pie chart, $198 billion is out there and available for student aid. And here's how it breaks down. We're looking at, and again, if you kind of look at the pie chart there and the blue wedge there on the lower part of your screen, you'll see the private sources is 3.1% in the entire pie. You see the federal student loans obviously is 47.5%. And on the webinar, I'm going to take a fair amount of time and talk about everything on the left as well, and really look at where do we find the money and where do these sources come from. Before we do that, let's talk about eligibility. There's some myths out there and realities. People will say, gosh, my income's too high. Well, I can tell you I have families that are, in $150,000 ranges and are still getting need-based financial aid. Grades too low, as long as you're not failing, you will qualify for need-based aid. Now, as far as owning a home, on the financial aid forms for the public schools, they don't even ask about whether or not you own a home. Private schools will and may ask this question, and we'll talk, more about that as we get into this. Now, aid is only for special groups. That's completely not true. It's an easy process. I can tell you families have other four-letter words than easy when it comes to doing this process. And then lastly, high schools and the college people can help. Let's talk about each of these. There's approximately 450 students per guidance counselor on average, and they're really dealing primarily with drug issues, sex issues, teenage issues. It's really a challenge for our guidance counselors at our high schools to handhold and really help our children, put a good plan together when it comes to getting prepared for college. And then as far as the colleges helping, the analogy I use is, it would be like doing this process would actually be like going to the IRS to have them do your tax returns. I actually had an elderly client. She would do this, and the reason she would do it is she said, A, it was free, and B, I was guaranteed not to get audited. And I will tell you, going to talk to the colleges to help you do your financial aid forms is like going to the IRS to help them do your tax return. So you really want to be aware of that scenario. Now, how do you determine your eligibility? The first area here, and this is a formula you really want to know, it's COA, which stands for cost of attendance, and that includes your tuition, books, room and board, miscellaneous expenses. And then you would subtract what's called your EFC, or estimated family contribution. This is the amount that the school system, or I should say the federal system, believes you can afford to pay for college. And that includes the parents' income, student income and assets, the age of the parents, and age of the students, and the number of kids going to school. That really determines how much need you're going to be looking at. And families fall into basically three categories. The first category would be Category 1. These are families who are going to get 100% of need-based financial aid no matter where their students go. And it's really important to make sure that all the financial aid forms are done accurately and on time, to make sure that you can maximize the most free money and less in terms of loans. Now, Category 2 families, those are families that are going to get financial aid depending on which schools they choose and how their assets and income are positioned. Those are going to be the majority of the people participating in this webinar. And it really is a matter of, proper positioning up front of assets and income in a proper manner to be able to maximize this Category 2 scenario. Category 3 families, these are families that technically make too much money. They're going to be north of $250,000, and they're not going to qualify for need-based aid, but they still need to go through the process in order to get merit-based money. And what I mean by that is a lot of Category 3 families will not even bother to fill out the financial aid forms because they say, we're not going to qualify. And most colleges and universities really want to see what you look like on paper before they're going to provide merit-based aid for your student. So that's real key, that there are merit-based dollars out there. And the other thing is that these folks really need to be concerned about paying for college in really the most tax-efficient fashion, and take into consideration how that's going to affect all their other financial and retirement goals that they will have. So once again, those are your three categories. Let's talk about the sources of financial aid and really where we're going to find that money. So we talked about $198 billion out there. First source, as we saw, was the federal government. Now, for those Category 1 families, they're going to qualify for Pell Grants, what's called an SEOG, or Supplemental Educational Grant. They'll get those dollars. This third category here, College Work Study, I'm a real fan of this. Now, whether you're Category 1, 2, or 3, these dollars can be available. This is really where the student gets to work on campus or off campus in a work-study program, and the money that they earn does not count against them for purposes of financial aid. And statistically, the kids that do the college work-study program typically get better grades. They've got less time to get into trouble, and so always highly recommend that the families, especially those seniors that are listening, that they check off the college work-study on the application. You can always say no to it, but you got to check it off in order to get it. Now, subsidized and unsubsidized Stafford loans. Subsidized loans are the loans where essentially the interest is free for that entire 4 years while the student is in college until 6 months after graduation. And the unsubsidized loans, those are loans where the interest clock begins day one in the fall when school starts, and you can defer the payment on those, but they are accumulating over time, so they'll continue to get bigger and bigger. The Perkins loan is also a subsidized loan, and that loan will actually give you 9 months until after graduation before the student would have to actually start paying that money back. This last category here, which is called the Parent Plus loan, that's the parent loan for undergraduate students. This is a federal loan that personally I would put a big red X through, and really strongly recommend people don't do this or really understand what they're doing before they do this loan. The current interest rate is 7.9%. It's a 10-year loan, and just a couple years ago, this loan was nearly 9%. So it does adjust year over year, and I have seen families go nearly bankrupt by taking out these Parent Plus loans because they start out $200-300 a month first semester, and then second semester they go up, another couple $100, and each year, the money keeps going up, and then the second student comes online, when that student's in their second year, and I mean, I've seen people's, and I have actually seen a client where they're now looking to actually do a repayment back on this Parent Plus loan of over $2,500 a month, and it's just something you really want to be aware of before you go down this path. Now, the state governments also have money available, so if your student's going to go into healthcare, be a teacher, you want to contact your higher education for the information to find out about those additional dollars as well. Now, this category here, the colleges and universities, I will tell you that for all of you listening that this is where you're going to find the most amount of money. The private universities have huge endowments outside of the federal and state funds, and these dollars are awarded on a first-come, first-served basis. And once again, this is where having your student really being, your incoming freshman being in that top 25 percentile of those incoming freshmen, you're going to be eligible because they do preferential packaging for those incoming kids that fall in that upper quartile. And again, lots of dollars to be had in this particular category. Those Category 3 families, that's a real big point that you want to be paying attention to help find those merit dollars for your student. And then lastly, we already talked about the private sources, the 3.1%. So again, really, you want to spend, the majority of your money going after those other three sources to find those dollars when it comes to, finding funding dollars for college. Now let's talk about the application process. There's a form called the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. This is predominantly for your public schools. Now, a large number of these go in with errors and inconsistencies. Tom, would you like to take a guess at what percentage of these go in with errors currently?
I would have to guess 60%.
That's pretty good. It's actually 74% is the current rate. And so 3 out of 4 of these are actually going in with errors. And the real key point on this is that these particular dollars, there's a finite amount available for these families. So if you've got an error, something as simple as a social security number being wrong, that form will get kicked back and can be moved back 4 to 6 weeks for processing. And so since financial aid is given out on a first-come, first-served basis and it's finite, you really want to make sure that you're getting this correct, on the front end. For the senior students, January 1st of their senior year is the first day that you can fill out this form. It runs through March 2nd, and if you can get this form in by February 15th, you're in what's called priority filing. You'll be in the top 10% of the folks actually filling out this form nationally. And then the next form is what's called the CSS profile. Many of your private schools require the CSS profile, and it will ask, there's over 100 questions on the FAFSA form. There's another 100, 150 on the actual profile form. And for this, you have to register and pay an application fee, and it all has to be done via the Internet. And then in this regard, they will start to look at your home equity. They'll look at a more detailed explanation, wanting to see, income and assets and business and such. But the real key here is making sure that this form is filled out, exactly the way that you're filling out the FAFSA form so that, they all line up together. And then the third area would be the schools and the institutions themselves. So your colleges and universities, they will, in many cases, ask you for their own additional forms. And the key here is you just want to make sure they're really consistent with both the FAFSA and the profile form as you're going through this process. When we look at everything in total here, we're looking at, I want to kind of take a step back here on these additional forms here. Additionally, for the profile schools, they're going to be looking at businesses and also if you've got a farm supplement. Now, a lot of times this comes up when I do workshops. People ask about, if I'm divorced, how does that work? And when I ask people the question that, if let's say that mom got remarried to stepdad and the child's now living with stepdad, whose financials do we use for purposes of putting in these financial aid forms? And more than 50% of the audience will tell me both. And the right answer is whoever that student lives with 51% of the time. That's whose financials you would use for purposes of filling out the financial aid forms when it comes to their income and their assets and all the other things that go along, in that line. So the overall end result on everything here is when you look at this is you've got, parents and students filling out about 5 to 9 forms, approximately 15 to 20 hours in processing them, and then still 3 out of 4, 74% going in with errors and inconsistencies. So let's talk about now colleges that will give you the best shot at getting the money. Something that folks really want to understand is that each college and university has their own formula for how much money they will actually give when it comes to this financial aid process. And I'll give you an example here. Some schools will meet as much as 100%, and I'm not for instance, you've got Harvard or Stanford, and they're not the only ones, but more of the privates tend to be on the 100%. More of the publics tend to be, in the 30 to 80%. But in this scenario here, with your cost of attendance, minus your family contribution, which gives you the need, let's say we're looking at a state school that runs 20 grand, and your family contribution, the amount you're responsible for, is 10 grand, means that you have a need at that particular school of $10,000. Now, if that school only provides 60% of need-based aid, you have a shortfall of $4,000. So now your family contribution, or the portion this family is going to have to pay, is the $4,000 plus the $10,000, and it's now $14,000. So even before $1 of financial aid kicks in at this school, you've already got a 40% shortfall. So you really got to know these statistics and these numbers before you apply. It's a key point when you're looking at these colleges. And then secondly, a lot of schools will provide a large percentage of gift aid, and this is good. Gift aid is the money that you don't pay back, and so, really we're looking for schools that have the largest number in the free money as opposed to colleges that are giving out money mostly in loans. So it's really, again, you want to know these statistics early on when your student's getting ready to fill out these applications so you know what you're looking at. And then, once again, kind of the percentage of self-help aid. One thing you don't want to have happen is, when your student graduates in May of their senior year, well, you don't want to find out in June of that year that the colleges that they filled out their applications for, when they get that award letter from that college, you don't want to see that coming back with mostly loans and work study. You really want to know what is the history of that school and what have they done in the past. So it's really important to know these statistics before applying. And I might just make a note that, we have a software system that actually, with every college and university in the U.S., that actually shows these statistics so people can actually understand what those are, in their planning process before they apply. I'd like to take just a moment and go through a case study which kind of refers to this scenario. If you look at Stanford and UCLA, basically, and these are last year's numbers, but $58,000 for Stanford and $30,000 for UCLA. But if you look at the center of the slide, this is kind of the point I was making. You can see Stanford provides 100% need, while UCLA only provides 81% need. Now, the gift money, free money you don't pay back, you got Stanford at 91% and UCLA at 70%. Self-help, which is basically loans and work study, is 9% at Stanford and 30% at UCLA. Just to kind of bottom line it, and this was actually a real family, basically, if this family had chose to go to UCLA as opposed to Stanford, they would have actually paid $3,698 more per year to go to a college that runs about half the price of Stanford. So it's really important to know these numbers and understand how these colleges are structured when it comes to giving out these dollars, before you actually go through this application process. Let's talk about negotiation. A lot of folks may or may not know that you can, in actual fact, negotiate for a better financial aid package. And once again, a lot of times some schools will misaward you. In that scenario, you're not going to say anything. But many schools will underaward you. And when they do, it's important to know whether or not you actually were underawarded. And then some schools will actually try to compete with other schools. And again, you want to know whether or not to accept that first award letter when you're looking at these. So you want to know the history of the school and what they've usually been giving out. So you want to, and also obviously know how to talk to these people, within the financial aid offices. And again, this is this concept that is called financial aid leveraging, and about 65% of your private schools and 27% of the public schools actually engage in this process. And really, the goal here is for them to see how little need they can give out in order to get your student to enroll. And that was quoted from Money Magazine in that regard. Now, you can get more need-based financial aid for colleges by rearranging your financial affairs and learning, the legally established rules in order to do that. And it's perfectly legal and ethical to get more money in your pocket, when it comes to the process. And really by knowing these legal tax loopholes and how to do this, you can really save thousands of dollars. I mean, literally, $10,000 over, a 4-year period is significant, when you look at this entire process. And I've got an example here of two parents, one parent who took control, which was family B versus family A, and essentially their financials and income are identical, but family B took the time to plan and rearrange their financial situation, and essentially they lowered the amount that they had to come up with, their family contribution, and the difference there was $9,000 per year. And so because family B kind of took the time to understand the process and kind of put this whole pieces of the puzzle together, over a 4-year period, they saved themselves $36,000 just by planning in the process. And again, I know we covered this, but if you make too much money and you don't qualify for need-based aid, this is where I was referring to earlier. There's several ways to actually approach this process, and clearly, looking at this from a merit-based perspective with your student can be a huge opportunity in order to help the family. And obviously, there's other tax loopholes as well in order to put more dollars, back in your pocket, when it comes to getting more dollars for the family, even if they're in that Category 3 scenario that we were talking about earlier. So what are your options? Well, you can do it yourself, and certainly if you're the type of person, that would kind of solve your own legal issues and treat your own medical conditions, then certainly that would probably be an option for you. And, if you're willing to gamble $80,000 to $200,000 a year per kid, then by all means, you can do it yourself, and the colleges will love you for it. The second way is to let your accountant do it for you. And when you let your accountant do it for you, my CPA and accountant, his daughter is actually a client of ours, and I get many of my referrals from him. He's been in the business for 25 years. He is a very good CPA, but he understands what is important in that the tax formulas are totally different than the financial aid formulas. Filling out tax returns is totally different than filling out the college financial aid forms, and accountants tend to apply accounting principles, as opposed to the financial aid principles that need to be looked at accordingly when it comes to the college side of this process. So just ask yourself this question. If any of you or many of you would be interested in knowing, what your financial aid package might look like at the schools you're considering before you apply, that was that Stanford versus UCLA scenario where you can understand, what your financial aid package might look like. And if you're interested in knowing what category your family falls into, whether it's Category 1, 2, or 3, and if you would like to know what your family contribution is, the portion that you're responsible to pay each and every year, And then lastly, if you'd like to know what your asset protection allowance is, that's the amount of money that you can have in savings or money market or non-retirement assets before it actually counts against you. Then I do recommend, one of the things that we offer is a free 1-hour, no obligation consultation, and you can do that by registering on our website at www.collegetuitionadvice.com. And with that, I want to end off by saying I really like this quote from T. Boone Pickens. He says that a fool with a plan is better than a genius with none. And I will say that planning is a key element to this entire process to winning at this particular game and funding college for your kids. So with that, I want to thank you, Tom, and turn it back over to you.
Michael, great, very informative presentation. I'm sure many people had no idea that they could actually come close to cutting their college tuition costs in half if they just take the right approach. And that last slide really said it all. With a plan, you can get much further ahead than you would without a plan. So I think it was a great presentation. I've got a few questions, and we've got a couple of minutes. I understand that your company also helps guide parents to the best schools, or you can help get students into the best schools. Tell us more about that.
Sure. Yeah, we actually have the ability with families, because I know we spent a lot of time talking about the financial aid side, but when it comes to the admissions and applications process, we actually provide some tools and resources to help families. We actually have 35 certified counselors across the United States that works with students in a very one-on-one personalized private student interview process. And along with that, we have a student assessment process which really helps to discover what makes that student tick, what are their interests. And the goal in this entire process is really making sure that we're building and narrowing down the optimal school list so it's right fitted for that student. And the two key things in this is, really helping the student discover what major they want to have in college and also what career path. And if we can get those two items worked out early on, we in many scenarios can save families, an extra semester or year and a half of college. So it's a real key part of the process.
To me, it sounds like it is a service that is replacing the guidance counselor that you would normally turn to within the high school.
Yes, that's correct. And, with all due respect to guidance counselors, and they do a great job, but in order to provide that really personalized, tailored one-on-one help, really more like a coach and a consultant to that student, or a mentor, I should say, really makes a huge difference in the success and really getting the kid too excited on engaging in this process, and so it makes a big difference.
Yeah, I would think that, and it's a long time ago that I was in high school, of course, but I would think that you made the point earlier that guidance counselors are overwhelmed with other issues and may not really have the time, energy, ability to do what's best for your child in helping them select the best school based on what it is that they really want to do with their education and with their life. So I think that's a great service. Now, I understand from talking to you before the webinar that your company also helps clients get kids into schools that they may not even have on their list. How does that work?
Sure. There's a few things in there, and I want to just talk about one key point for people is that, the GPA is really a key component for the kids getting accepted, along with what's called their standardized tests, which is the SAT and the ACT. So we actually, again, through a coaching model and through some tools and resources, specifically on the SAT and the ACT, we really provide some little-known strategies to help the students boost those scores up. And we're helping kids get an extra 200 points on the SAT and an extra 2 to 3 to 4 points on the ACT, and that can be the difference, between getting into the school of their choice and getting those additional dollars that that kid and the family really want for that student. And then kind of to go along with that, when they get engaged in the application and also the college essay process, we also have, again, counselors that will help that student to review, edit, critique, and really polish the essay, which we would call a resume or brag sheet, to make sure that they actually, in the eyes of the admission counselors and decision makers, it really has them stand out when the college admissions committees are looking at that student for accepting them to that college.
What a great service. I think you've really not only thought of it all, but you put a plan in place that seems very easy to follow for the parents that really want to provide the best for their children, get them into the right schools, have them get on a career path that's going to excite their child all the way through school and into the world, and do it without spending as much money as so many people do. You see it all the time, of course, where it's such a burden. If you've got 2, 3, even 4 children, you want to put them all through college. What a huge expense that can be, and what a great job you guys do in cutting that expense and helping families get their kids into the right schools, and everybody wins.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you for your time, Michael. Great job. Thank you, everyone, for participating in the webinar today. You can see Michael's contact information up on your screen. If you have children or grandchildren and you want to see them get the very best that they can get when it comes to getting into secondary education, I can't recommend Michael enough. You've done a great job for so many clients, and it's been an honor to have you on here today, Michael. Good job, and thank you again very much.
You're very welcome, and I appreciate it, Tom. Thanks again.
Well, thank you, everyone, for attending. Enjoy the rest of your day.